I'm Marilyn, 34 female. I live in a quiet suburban town in a small house that I bought with my own hard-earned money. I'm a forensic accountant, which means my job is to find the story hidden in the numbers. For years, I ignored the story my own bank account was telling me, one where I was the sole provider for my family's comfort, not just my own. It all came to a head on New Year's Eve, when my mother and sister made one demand too many, not realizing I had finally finished auditing my own life. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For as long as I can remember, I have been the responsible one. It's a label that sounds like a compliment but feels like a cage. In my family, responsible was just another word for available. Available to babysit, available to co-sign, available to lend money that was never meant to be returned. This unspoken arrangement was our family tradition, as ingrained and expected as gathering for Thanksgiving. I was the safety net, the emergency fund, and the on-call caregiver, all rolled into one. My mother, Elena, and my younger sister, Sophia, were the architects of this tradition, and I was their most reliable resource. Elena, a former bank teller, carried herself with an air of financial authority that was completely unearned. She believed her years of counting other people's money gave her an intrinsic right to manage mine. "Marilyn, you're so good with numbers," she'd say, her voice dripping with faux admiration. "It's only natural you'd help us out. We're family." That word, family, was the key to my vault. It was the guilt-laced password they used to access my time, energy, and most frequently, my bank account. Sophia was a different breed of dependent. At 29, 5 years my junior, she had crafted a life that looked perfect from the outside. She was a stay-at-home mom to my nephew, Noah, and my niece, Chloe, and a self-proclaimed influencer. Her social media was a curated gallery of domestic bliss, perfectly decorated cookies, immaculate living room scenes, and smiling children in coordinated outfits. What her followers didn't see was the scaffolding holding up this perfect life, and that scaffolding was me. I paid for the photography classes that taught her how to get the perfect lighting. I funded the spontaneous, weekend getaways that provided her content. And more often than not, the organic groceries in her pantry were bought with money I had loaned her. The babysitting was perhaps the most relentless part of the tradition. Sophia and her husband worked in shifts, or at least that was the story. It meant there was always a reason they needed me. "Marilyn, can you take the kids Friday night? I need to prep for a brand collaboration." "Marilyn, can you watch them Saturday? We have a wedding." The requests were never phrased as questions. They were announcements of my schedule, delivered with the casual assumption that my own life was an empty slate they could write on. My protests were always met with the same well-rehearsed lines. "But the kids love spending time with their Auntie M," Sophia would chirp. "Don't you want them to have a stable presence in their lives?" Elena would add, the implication being that my refusal was a form of emotional neglect. This had been going on for years, escalating slowly but surely. It started with babysitting in my early 20s when I was just starting my career. Then came the financial loans when Sophia got married. After my father passed away 10 years ago, leaving my mother with a modest pension, I became Elena's financial crutch as well. I helped her with her mortgage payments, covered unexpected car repairs, and paid for the new roof she insisted she needed. Each time it was an emergency, a one-time thing, but the emergencies never stopped. They became the norm. My friend Ben was the only one who saw the situation for what it was. Ben and I had been friends since college, and he was the sanest person I knew. A high school history teacher, he had a calm, methodical way of looking at the world. "Marilyn, a tradition is something that brings people joy and honors the past," he told me one evening over coffee, after I'd vented about having to cancel our plans to watch Noah and Chloe yet again. "What they're doing isn't a tradition. It's exploitation. They've been running the same play for a decade because you've never called a foul." He was right, of course. I knew he was right. But knowing something and acting on it are two very different things. The emotional blackmail was potent. The fear of being labeled the selfish daughter, the uncaring sister, was a powerful deterrent. I was trapped in a cycle of my own making, conditioned to say yes even when every fiber of my being screamed no. The financial draw. In was staggering. As a forensic accountant, I track money for a living. I uncover fraud, trace assets, and make sense of complex financial webs. But I had been willfully blind to the financial hemorrhage in my own life. I kept my personal finances in a state of deliberate disorganization, a stark contrast to my meticulous professional life. I didn't want to see the total. I didn't want to add up all the loans, the gifts, the bills I'd covered. The truth felt too big, too damning. It would force me to confront the reality that my love was being measured in dollars, and I was failing their test every time I tried to set a boundary. The emotional cost was just as high. I was constantly exhausted. My own social life was non-existent. Dates were out of the question because I could never commit to a weekend plan. Friendships withered because I was always canceling at the last minute. My home, which should have been my sanctuary, was a revolving door of family obligations. It was filled with the toys Noah and Chloe would leave behind, the lingering scent of my mother's critical perfume, and the heavy weight of their expectations. I was living a life that wasn't my own, serving the needs of two grown women who had mastered the art of weaponizing affection. Looking back, the signs of the coming storm were all there. The increasing frequency of their requests, the growing sense of entitlement in their tone, my own deepening resentment. The foundation of our tradition was cracking, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. I just never imagined it would happen on New Year's Eve, the one night of the year dedicated to new beginnings. They were about to push me one step too far, forcing me to finally do for myself what I did for my clients every day: examine the evidence, follow the money, and expose the fraud. The tradition was about to be broken, and the silence of my compliance was about to be replaced by the cold, hard clarity of a bank statement. The role of the responsible one was coming to an end, and I had no idea what or who I would be without it. But I was about to find out. The week between Christmas and New Year's has a strange, suspended quality to it. It's a week of leftovers, reflection, and for me, a week of dread. New Year's Eve was my mother and sister's favorite night to leverage my built-in babysitting service. For them, it was a night of champagne, parties, and glamorous social media posts. For me, it was a night of pizza, cartoons, and putting two overexcited children to bed. This year, however, I had dared to make a plan. Ben had invited me to a small gathering at his house, a low-key evening with a few of his friends, board games, and a clear view of the city's fireworks from his balcony. It was the first New Year's plan I'd made for myself in nearly a decade, and I was cautiously optimistic. The ultimatum came on the afternoon of December 31st. I was at my mother's house, dropping off some financial documents she'd asked me to review for her taxes, another unpaid job on my list. The air was thick with the scent of pine from her wilting Christmas tree and the cloying sweetness of holiday potpourri. Sophia was there with Noah and Chloe, who were running wild in the living room, their new Christmas toys already looking worn. "Marilyn, darling," Eleanor began, not looking up from the TV guide she was studying with intense concentration. "Just to confirm, you'll be at your house around 7 tonight to get the kids. We need to leave by 7:30. My heart did a familiar little flip-flop of anxiety. It wasn't a question, it was a directive. I took a deep breath, clutching my purse strap. "Actually, Mom, I can't tonight, I have plans." The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. Eleanor slowly lowered the TV guide, her perfectly arched eyebrows raising in disbelief. Sophia, who had been scrolling through her phone on the armchair, looked up, a smirk already playing on her lips. This was their arena, and I had just broken the rules of the game. "Plans," Eleanor repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept. "What kind of plans? No one told me you had plans." "I'm going to a friend's house," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "For New Year's." Sophia scoffed, a short, sharp sound of derision. "A friend's house? Marilyn, it's New Year's Eve. It's a night for family." She gestured vaguely towards her children. "We have plans. We're going to the annual gala at the country club. I have a new dress. It's important for my brand." "Your brand?" I asked, unable to keep the incredulity out of my voice. "Yes, my brand," she snapped, her tone defensive. "Networking is work, Marilyn. You wouldn't understand." "Your sister needs a night off," Alina interjected, her voice shifting into its signature guilt-inducing tone. "She works so hard with the children, and your father and I used to go to that gala every year. It's sentimental for me." She was lay. And it on thick, weaving a tapestry of maternal sacrifice and widow's grief. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. "I understand that," I said, my resolve hardening. "But I also need a night off. I work hard too. I made these plans weeks ago." This was when Sophia delivered the checkmate move, the one they always used when they felt their control slipping. She smiled, a saccharine, knowing smile, and turned to her son. "Noah, sweetie, who are you having a sleepover with tonight for New Year's?" Noah, who had been ramming a toy truck into the leg of the coffee table, looked up with wide, innocent eyes. "Auntie Em," he shouted gleefully. "We're gonna watch the fireworks and eat popcorn." Sophia's smirk widened. She looked back at me, her eyes glinting with triumph. "We already told them, Marilyn," she said softly, each word a perfectly aimed dart. "They've been looking forward to it all week. You wouldn't want to disappoint them, would you? Chloe would be crushed." And there it was. The final, brutal move, using the children as emotional shields. It was cruel, and it was effective. My stomach twisted. Disappointing my niece and nephew felt like a physical blow. They were innocent pawns in a game they didn't even know was being played. I looked at their excited faces and felt my carefully constructed boundaries begin to crumble. I just nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak. A single, defeated nod. It was all they needed. "Wonderful," Alina declared, clapping her hands together as if settling a minor business transaction. She picked up the TV guide again, the crisis averted. 7 o'clock, then, don't be late." Sophia went back to her phone, already composing a post about her NY Eglem night. The conversation was over. My plans were irrelevant. My feelings were collateral damage. I was dismissed. I walked out of that house feeling hollowed out. The cold December air felt sharp against my hot cheeks. I sat in my car for a long time, the engine off, just replaying the scene in my head. The casual entitlement, the calculated manipulation, the use of the children's affections as a weapon. It wasn't just about babysitting. It was about power. It was about their unshakable belief that my life was secondary to their wants. I drove home in a daze. I texted Ben, "So sorry, have to cancel, family stuff." His reply came instantly, "Marilyn, no, call me." I didn't call. I couldn't bear to hear the disappointment in his voice, or worse, the "I told you so" that he was too kind to ever say, but that I would hear anyway. I felt a profound sense of shame. I was a 34-year-old woman, a successful professional who managed multi-million-dollar accounts, and yet I was utterly powerless against the emotional whims of my own family. That nod, that single, silent gesture of capitulation, haunted me for the rest of the afternoon. It felt like the culmination of 1,000 other nods, 1,000 other canceled plans, 1,000 other moments where I had placed their happiness above my own. But as the hours ticked by and the winter sun began to set, something inside me began to shift. The hollowness started to fill with a cold, hard anger. The shame started to burn away, leaving behind a strange and unfamiliar clarity. They had issued an ultimatum, believing I had no choice but to comply. They had played their winning hand, confident in my predictable defeat, but they had miscalculated. They thought they were just securing a babysitter for New Year's Eve. They had no idea they were igniting a revolution. That night, they would show up at my door, expecting the same compliant Marilyn they had always known. They would be met with a locked door and a note. That nod wasn't an act of surrender. It was the quiet, final closing of a door, and they hadn't even heard it click shut. The anger that had started simmering after I left my mother's house didn't fade. Instead, it clarified into a cold, sharp resolve. For years, I had been operating on emotion, letting guilt and a misplaced sense of duty dictate my actions. That afternoon, for the first time, I decided to approach my family problem the way I would a professional one, with logic, data, and a complete detachment from sentiment. I was a forensic accountant. It was time to audit my own life. My first step was to face the monster I had been avoiding for years, my own financial records. I went into my home office, a space usually reserved for my clients' complex problems, and turned the full force of my professional skills on myself. I pulled up my bank statements, credit card bills, and old digital transaction records going back 5 years. I created a new spreadsheet, its cells clean and unforgiving. I labeled 3 columns: Eliner, Sophia, and Sophia's family. The process was methodical and painful. I started with the obvious, the direct money transfers. There were hundreds of them, each with a vague memo like for groceries, to help with bills, or simply, "Love you." I had sent them without a second thought, seeing them as small gestures of support. But laid out in a column, the small gestures added up to a staggering sum. It was like watching a slow, steady bleed. Then I moved on to the bills. I had access to Eliner's accounts because I helped her with her online banking. I cross-referenced her mortgage statements with my own bank records. For 3 years, I had been covering the shortfall on her monthly payments. She told me it was just a temporary fix until her pension was sorted out. The pension had been sorted out 2.5 years ago. The payments from my account had never stopped. I found the receipts for her new roof, $12,000 I had paid directly to the contractor after she'd called me in a panic about a leak. I found the car repair bills, the insurance payments, the property tax supplements. Sophia's column grew just as quickly. There were the loans for her brand, a new camera, a laptop, lighting equipment. There were the payments for the kids' extracurricular activities, ballet classes for Chloe, soccer camp for Noah, that she claimed she couldn't afford. There were the endless online shopping sprees from clothing boutiques and home decor websites, often delivered to my house so her husband wouldn't see the packages. I had been her silent, complicit partner in her financial deception. But the real discovery, the one that turned my cold anger into icy fury, came from an unexpected place. While sorting through a box of old receipts I kept for tax purposes, my hand brushed against a small, crumpled piece of thermal paper. It was from a high-end restaurant downtown, the Gilded Spoon, dated a little over a year ago. The total was obscene, over $400 for a dinner for 2. I didn't remember ever going there. I looked closer at the date. It was my birthday. I remembered that day clearly. I had wanted to do something simple, maybe go out for a quiet dinner with Ben. But Sophia had called in a panic. Her husband had to work late and she had a terrible migraine. Could I possibly watch the kids? She sounded so pathetic, so genuinely unwell, that I'd canceled on Ben and spent my birthday evening watching cartoons and eating macaroni and cheese with Noah and Chloe. My mother had sent me a text. "Happy birthday, dear. Sorry we can't celebrate. Sophia is so sick. Family must come first." The receipt was a lie detector test that my family had spectacularly failed. It was itemized. 2 pre-fixed tasting menus with wine pairings. Oysters, lobster, champagne. It was a celebration dinner. I pulled up my credit card statement from that month. There it was, a charge for $423.50 at the Gilded Spoon. But next to it was another transaction, a mobile payment I'd sent to Sophia that same day for $500, with the memo, "For emergency plumber." I remembered that call too. She had claimed a pipe had burst in her kitchen. She needed the money immediately. My blood ran cold. They hadn't just lied to me. They had used a fabricated emergency to get me to fund their lavish dinner while simultaneously tricking me into babysitting so they could go. They ate lobster and drank champagne on my dime on my birthday, while I ate leftover mac and cheese, believing my sister was sick in bed. It wasn't just about the money. It was the breathtaking cruelty of it, the premeditation, the complete and utter disregard for me as a person. This single receipt was the key. It unlocked a new level of investigation. My professional instincts took over completely. This was no longer just about entitlement. This was about fraud. I started digging deeper, no longer just looking for what I had given them, but for what they had taken without my knowledge. I remembered giving Sophia a supplementary credit card years ago with a small limit for emergencies only. I had trusted her not to abuse it. It was a trust she had shattered into a million pieces. I logged into the credit card portal and pulled the detailed statements for that supplementary card. My breath caught in my throat. It was a litany of their secret lives. There were charges for spa days for two, always on a weekday when I was at work, and a leaner was supposedly at a doctor's appointment. There were hotel bookings in nearby cities for girls' weekends I had never been invited on. There were purchases from luxury brands I knew Sophia coveted but could never afford. They were living a double life, funded by me. The responsible, reliable Marilyn they presented to the world was their personal bank, their dupe. While I worked 60-hour weeks, they were enjoying lunches, spa treatments, and weekend getaways. Every lie they had ever told me was cast in a new, sinister light. Every emergency was now a potential fraud. Every request for help was a calculated withdrawal from an account they believed was infinite. I worked for hours, the spreadsheet growing into a monstrous testament to their deception. The numbers on the screen were no longer just digits, they were years of my life. They were the vacations I never took, the savings I never accumulated, the future I had postponed for their present comfort. By the time the sun had set, casting long shadows across my office, the audit was complete. The total at the bottom of the spreadsheet made me feel sick. It was well into 6 figures. It was a down payment on a bigger house. It was an investment portfolio. It was my freedom. The New Year's ultimatum was no longer just an insult. It was the final, arrogant withdrawal from a bank that was officially closed. The crumpled receipt from the gilded spoon sat on my desk, a tiny, powerful symbol of my liberation. It was the piece of evidence that would bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. I finally had the full story, written in black and white, and I knew, with absolute certainty, what the final chapter would be. The discovery of the restaurant receipt and the subsequent audit of my finances acted as a catalyst. The emotional fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded my judgment for years was gone, replaced by the stark, cold clarity of numbers on a spreadsheet. My training as a forensic accountant had taken over, and my personal life had become my most compelling case. The objective was no longer just to understand the extent of the damage, but to trace every thread of deceit and reclaim what was mine. The first step was to secure my own assets. That evening, on December 31st, while my mother and sister were likely getting ready for their gala, I was methodically dismantling the financial scaffolding I had built around them. I logged into my online banking portal and started making changes. The joint savings account I shared with my mother, opened years ago to help her manage her bills, was the first to go. I had always been the sole contributor to that account. It was my emergency fund, masquerading as her safety net. I transferred the entire balance, a significant 5-figure sum, into a new account at a different bank, one she had no knowledge of. Then, I initiated the process to have her name removed and the account closed. Next was the supplementary credit card attached to my account that Sophia used for emergencies. I went through the recent charges one last time, noting the purchases from a high-end baby boutique and a subscription box for artisanal coffee. With a grim satisfaction, I clicked the button to report the card as lost or stolen. I requested it be immediately deactivated and that a replacement be sent only to my primary address. Her financial lifeline, at least the one directly tied to me, was severed. This was only the beginning. The real work began as I delved deeper into the transactions, following the money trail with a dispassionate focus. I was looking for patterns, for connections, for the story behind the numbers. I noticed that many of Sophia's emergency requests for money coincided with posts on her social media showing off new clothes or a redecorated room. The emergency plumber money had clearly funded her birthday celebration with our mother. A request for money to fix her car's transmission lined up perfectly with a weekend getaway she took with friends, documented in a series of beachside photos. The most damning evidence, however, involved my mother. Eleanor had always portrayed herself as financially fragile, a widow struggling to get by on a meager pension. My audit revealed a different story. I had been helping her with her mortgage, but I found through public property records that the mortgage had been fully paid off 6 months prior. She had used an inheritance from a distant aunt to clear the debt, but had never told me. She had continued to accept my help every month, pocketing the money for herself. It wasn't about need, it was about greed. Where was that money going? I started cross-referencing the dates she received money from me with her own limited bank activity that I could see. There were regular cash withdrawals, always from an ATM near a local casino. My mother, who presented herself as a woman who barely had enough for groceries, was gambling. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Her worried calls about the rising cost of living, her sighs about unexpected expenses, it was all a performance to fund her habit. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The secrecy, the manufactured crises, the constant pressure for more money. It wasn't just my sister's lifestyle inflation, it was my mother's addiction. I had been enabling them both, one's pursuit of a fantasy life and the other's hidden vice. Armed with this devastating knowledge, my resolve hardened into steel. This was no longer just about teaching them a lesson, it was about protecting myself from their destructive behavior. I needed to create an impenetrable wall between my finances and their demands. The next step was to contact David, the lawyer friend I had mentioned in my previous frameworks. Oh, wait, I changed his name and profession. The user asked me to change him. My current character list has Ben, 35, Marilyn's friend, high school history teacher. A history teacher is not a lawyer. This makes things more complicated but more realistic. I can't just have him give legal advice. I will have to find a real lawyer. This makes the story stronger, as Marilyn has to take the formal step of seeking professional help rather than just relying on a friend. So, the next step was to find legal counsel. I spent an hour researching family law and financial dispute attorneys in my city. I needed someone who could advise me on how to legally and officially detangle myself from any obligations they might try to invent. I found a reputable firm and sent a carefully worded email requesting an urgent consultation, briefly outlining a situation involving financial abuse by family members. Then I turned my attention to the house. My name was on the deed to my mother's home. I was a co-owner. My father had insisted on it when they refinanced years ago, as I had contributed to the down payment. At the time, it seemed like a smart way to protect my investment. Now, I saw it as a liability, a tether that still connected me to her. Untangling that would be complicated, but it was a necessary step for a clean break. I added it to the list of topics to discuss with the lawyer. As I worked, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. For years, I had felt like a victim of circumstance, trapped by my family's needs. But now, sitting in my office, surrounded by documents and data, I was in control. I wasn't just reacting to their demands, I was proactively dismantling the system they had built. Every transfer I blocked, every account I closed, was a brick in my new wall. The investigation had given me more than just proof of their betrayal. It had given me a clear path forward. I wasn't just running away from the problem. I was systematically eliminating it. The money trail had led me through a dark and painful landscape of lies and manipulation, but it had also led me to the exit. The clock on my computer screen showed it was nearly 6:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve. They would be leaving for the gala soon. They would be expecting me to be preparing for the kids, laying out sleeping bags and stocking up on snacks. They had no idea that I was preparing for a war. A quiet, methodical, and financial war. The money trail had ended, and the battle plan was now complete. The next phase was about to begin. With the financial fortifications in place and a strategy for the future mapped out, all that was left was the final, immediate act of severance. It had to be simple, clear, and non-negotiable. I had spent years engaging in tearful arguments, circular conversations, and tense negotiations with my mother and sister. This time, there would be no discussion. There would be no room for their manipulative tactics or crocodile tears. There would only be a statement of fact. I took out a piece of thick, cream-colored cardstock from my desk, the kind I used for formal correspondence with clients. I wanted the physical message to feel as formal and final as the decision it represented. I picked up a black fountain pen, the ink permanent and stark against the page. My handwriting, usually a hurried scrawl, was deliberate and steady. Each letter was a carefully constructed symbol of my newfound resolve. The note was brief. I had edited it in my head a dozen times, stripping away any trace of emotion, anger, or justification. It read, "Elena and Sophia, the arrangement we have had is over, effective immediately. I will no longer be providing any financial support, babysitting services, or any other form of assistance. Your access to my financial accounts has been permanently revoked. I suggest you check your own financial situations and make arrangements accordingly. Do not contact me. I will reach out if and when I am ready. Any attempt to show up at my home or workplace will be viewed as harassment. This is not a discussion. It is a notification. Maryland." Reading it back, it felt cold, almost brutal. But it was necessary. Any hint of warmth, any opening for debate, would be a weakness they would exploit. The words harassment and notification were chosen deliberately. They were the language of business and law, not of family. I was officially changing the terms of our relationship from personal to transactional, and this was the final invoice. After writing the note, I made a copy of my spreadsheet, the one detailing every dollar, every lie, every transaction. I printed a summary page showing the grand total, a number so large it looked like a typo. I folded this summary and tucked it into a separate envelope. This was my evidence, the silent justification for my actions. While the note was the verdict, the spreadsheet was the proof. At precisely 6:55 p.m., I walked to my front door. My heart was pounding, a nervous, frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was the point of no return. I took a piece of strong packing tape and secured the note to the center of the door, right at eye level. It was impossible to miss. Then I turned my attention to the second envelope, the one containing the financial summary. I had already looked up the address for the country club hosting the New Year's Eve gala. It was a place I had only ever heard about, a symbol of the life they aspired to and that I unwillingly funded. I had arranged for a courier service, the kind used for delivering sensitive legal documents, to deliver the envelope to my mother, Elena, at the club. The instructions were specific: delivery between 9:00 and 9:30 p.m. to be handed directly to her. I wanted the truth to find them in the midst of their celebration, to shatter the illusion of their glamorous night out. With the note on the door and the courier scheduled, I went back inside and engaged every lock. I drew the curtains. I turned off all the lights except for a single lamp in the living room. I put my phone on silent and placed it face down on the coffee table. I didn't want to hear it ring. I didn't want to see their names flash on the screen. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my sofa, the silence of the house a stark contrast to the storm I had just unleashed. I thought about Noah and Chloe. A pang of guilt, a ghost of my old self, tried to surface. They would be excited, dressed in their pajamas, ready for a sleepover with their Auntie Em. They would be confused and disappointed when they were turned away. It was the only part of the plan that caused me real pain. But I had to accept that their temporary disappointment was a necessary casualty in the fight for my own survival. I couldn't save myself without letting them down, and I had to choose myself. For once, I had to be the priority. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. 7 o'clock came and went, then 7:15. I imagined them in the car, Sophia complaining about the traffic, Elena reapplying her lipstick. I pictured them pulling into my driveway, the kids bouncing in the back seat. At 7:28 p.m., the headlights of a car swept across my living room curtains. I froze, my teacup halfway to my lips. I heard car doors slam. Then, the sound of small feet running up my walkway, followed by the heavier tread of my sister's boots. "Auntie Em, we're here." Noah's excited voice pierced the silence. A small hand banged on the door. "Open up, Auntie Em." I didn't move, I barely breathed. I heard Sophia's impatient sigh. "Marilyn, open the door, it's freezing out here." Her voice was sharp, annoyed. She knocked loudly, a series of hard, insistent raps. Silence. "What is this?" I heard her say, her voice closer to the door now. She must have seen the note. I heard the sound of tape being ripped away, the rustle of cardstock. The silence that followed was different. It was heavier, laced with confusion and disbelief. I could almost feel her reading the words, her brain struggling to process a reality so different from the one she had expected. "Mom, you need to see this." Sophia's voice was a strained whisper. I heard my mother's footsteps approaching, more silence. Then a sharp, incredulous laugh from a leaner. "This is a joke, right? She thinks this is funny. Marilyn, open this door right now. This isn't a game." I remained perfectly still. The person they were yelling for, the compliant, responsible, doormat Marilyn, no longer lived here. The woman sitting in the dark was a stranger to them. The note on the door was her introduction. The real shock, the one that would turn their anger into pure panic, was still a couple of hours away. Their night was just beginning to unravel. The sounds outside my front door escalated from confusion to outrage. Eleanor's initial disbelief curdled into fury. She banged on the door with her fist, her voice rising in pitch. "Marilyn, I know you're in there. Stop this childish nonsense and open the door. You are going to ruin our night." Sophia was trying to placate the children, who had started to whine, sensing the tension. "Mommy, why won't Auntie Em let us in?" Chloe's small voice wobbled. "Auntie Em is being silly, sweetie," Sophia said, her voice tight with rage. "Just a silly, selfish game." I sat on my couch, my body rigid, listening to the predictable script of their anger. It was all about them. Their night being ruined, their plans being disrupted. There was no concern for me, no curiosity about why I might have done this. I was merely an appliance that had malfunctioned. After a few more minutes of fruitless shouting and pounding, the sounds retreated. I heard car doors slam again, an engine revving with unnecessary force, and then the squeal of tires as they pulled out of my driveway. The silence they left behind was profound. It was the sound of a battle won, the first in a very long war. I allowed Mize. Elf a single, shaky breath of relief. Phase 1 was complete. I checked my phone. No calls, no texts. They were likely regrouping, deciding on their strategy. They still believed they had the upper hand, that this was a tantrum I would get over. They hadn't checked their bank alerts yet. I spent the next hour in a state of suspended animation. I couldn't focus on a book or a movie. I just sat, listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator, waiting. At 8:45 p.m., my phone, still on silent, began to vibrate violently against the wooden coffee table. It buzzed and danced, the screen lighting up with Sophia's name. I watched it go to voicemail. A second later, it started again. I ignored it. Then a call from a leaner. Ignored. Then a barrage of text messages, one after another, the notifications making my phone shudder nonstop. My curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the phone. The screen was a wall of text. "Sophia, what the hell is wrong with you?" "Sophia, you left us stranded. The kids are crying." "Sophia, my credit card was just declined at the gas station." "Declined? Did you cancel it? You better not have canceled it." "Sophia, this is insane. Call me right now." Eleanor's texts were more direct. "Eleanor, your sister's card isn't working. Fix it." "Eleanor, I am your mother. You will not do this to me." "Eleanor, answer your phone, Marilyn." So, Sophia had discovered the deactivated card. That was the first domino. They were angry, but they weren't panicking yet. They hadn't grasped the full scope of the situation. The real explosion was yet to come. The courier, I calculated, should be arriving at the country club any minute now. At 9:22 p.m., the phone call came. It was from a leaner. This time, I answered, but I didn't speak. I just held the phone to my ear, listening. For a moment, there was only the sound of her ragged breathing, punctuated by the faint din of party music in the background. Then, her voice came, low and trembling with a rage so profound it was almost quiet. "What did you do?" I remained silent. "What did you do?" she repeated, the words cracking. "I just got a delivery, a piece of paper, with a number on it. Is this some kind of sick joke?" The courier had found her. She was holding the summary of my spreadsheet. She was looking at the six-figure tally of her and Sophia's deception. "That's not a joke, Alina," I said, my voice as calm and steady as I could make it. "It's an invoice." "An invoice?" she shrieked, the thin veneer of her control shattering completely. The party music in the background seemed to fade as she moved somewhere quieter. "You think you can send me a bill? After everything I've done for you, I raised you, I clothed you, I fed you." "You're right," I said evenly. "You did the bare minimum of what a parent is legally required to do. And for the last 15 years, I have more than repaid you. I paid for your house, a house you owned outright for the last 6 months while still taking my money. I paid for your vacations. I funded your secret trips to the casino." The line went dead quiet. I had deployed my final weapon, her secret. The silence stretched for a full 10 seconds. "How," she finally whispered, "how did you know about that?" "I'm a forensic accountant, Mom. Finding out where money goes is what I do." I decided to finally look at my own accounts. I could hear her starting to sob, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of fury and self-pity. "You have ruined everything," she cried. "We're here at the gala. Sophia is trying to network and you do this to us? You're selfish. You've always been a selfish, ungrateful child." The accusations, which once would have pierced me to the core, now felt pathetic and hollow. They were the desperate last shots from a general who had already lost the war. "The selfish one," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "is the mother who gambles away the money her daughter gives her for a mortgage she doesn't even have. The selfish one is the sister who lies about a burst pipe to trick her sibling into funding a birthday dinner that she's also been tricked into babysitting for. You two don't know the meaning of the word." I heard Sophia's voice in the background. "What is it? What's wrong? Is that her?" "She knows, Jess," Alina whimpered. "She knows everything." The phone was passed. Sophia's voice was a venomous hiss. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Sitting in your perfect little house, judging us. Well, my card is declined, and Mom's account is empty. What are we supposed to do?" "That sounds like a personal problem, Sophia," I said, quoting a line she had used on me countless times. "You're an adult. You're an influencer with a brand. Figure it out." "I have children," she screamed. "What about Noah and Chloe?" "They have 2 parents who are perfectly capable of taking care of them," I replied. "Their well-being is your responsibility, not mine. It always has been." "You'll regger." "At this, Marilyn," she spat, "you'll be all alone. No one will want anything to do with you." "Alone sounds peaceful, Sophia," I said. "Alone sounds like a vacation. Alone sounds like my money staying in my own bank account." And with that, I hung up. I blocked both their numbers. The phone call that was meant to break me, to intimidate me back into submission, had done the opposite. It had solidified my resolve. Hearing their panicked, selfish rage, their utter lack of remorse, was the final confirmation I needed. I had not made a mistake. I had executed a flawless escape. The noise was over. The silence that followed was the sound of my new life beginning. The first few days of January were unnervingly quiet. After the final, explosive phone call on New Year's Eve, my world fell silent. There were no more frantic calls from blocked numbers, no more angry text messages that I couldn't receive. It was as if a constant, high-pitched alarm that had been ringing in the background of my life for 15 years had finally been switched off. The silence was so absolute it was almost disorienting. In that quiet, I began to build my new life. The first order of business was the legal consultation I had scheduled. I met with a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer named Ms. Davis, who listened to my story with an impassive expression, occasionally nodding as she reviewed the financial summary I had prepared. "This is a textbook case of financial abuse," she stated when I had finished. "The documentation you have is impeccable. It will make things very straightforward." She guided me through the process of legally protecting myself. We drafted cease and desist letters to be sent to both Eleanor and Sophia, formally warning them against any form of contact or harassment. We initiated a partition action for my mother's house, a legal process to force the sale of the property and allow me to recover my equity. Ms. Davis was confident that given Eleanor's deception regarding the paid-off mortgage, the court would likely rule in my favor, awarding me not just my initial investment, but also a portion of the mortgage payments I had made after the loan was cleared. Leaving the lawyer's office, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. I had moved beyond a personal rebellion and into a formal, legally protected state of independence. The next challenge was navigating the emotional fallout, particularly concerning my nephew and niece. My heart ached for them. I knew they were innocent, and I missed them terribly. But I also knew that any contact with them would be used as a backdoor for Sophia and Eleanor to regain a foothold in my life. For now, I had to maintain my distance. I set up a separate savings account, a trust for Noah and Chloe, and began depositing a small amount each month. It was my way of caring for them from afar, ensuring they would have something for their future, free from the influence of their parents. It was the best I could do. My friendship with Ben, which had been so often sidelined by my family's demands, blossomed. When I finally told him everything that had happened, he listened without judgment. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just refilled my coffee cup and said, "I'm glad you chose yourself, Marilyn. It's about time." We spent the weekends that followed doing all the things I had never been able to do. We went for long hikes, tried new restaurants, and had lazy Sunday mornings reading the paper. On what would have normally been a babysitting Saturday, we drove to the coast and walked on the beach, the cold January wind feeling clean and sharp. For the first time in my adult life, my time was my own. I was discovering the simple joy of living without the constant weight of obligation. News from my family's side of the wall came in trickles, through the grapevine of distant relatives who called, ostensibly to check on me, but really to gather gossip. I learned that Sophia's influencer career had taken a massive hit. Without my funding, her perfectly curated life began to fall apart. Her husband, confronted with the reality of their financial situation and Sophia's deceptions, had insisted they enter marriage counseling and create a strict budget. Her social media posts became less frequent, her glamorous backdrops replaced by the mundane reality of her actual life. Eleanor's situation was more dire. The partition action forced the sale of the house. After I received my rightful share, she was left with a smaller, but still significant, sum of money. The last I heard, she had moved into a small rental apartment across town. The casino trips had apparently stopped, not out of a change of heart, but due to a lack of funds. She had tried to paint me as the villain of the story, the cold-hearted daughter who had thrown her own mother out on the street. But the financial summary I had shared with a few key family members, along with the truth about the paid-off mortgage. Had a way of correcting the narrative. Months passed, the seasons changed. Spring arrived, and with it, a sense of genuine renewal. I sold my small house and, using the money I had recovered from my mother's property, bought a beautiful condo with a balcony overlooking a park. It was a space that was entirely mine, with no history of family drama, no ghosts of obligations past. One sunny afternoon in May, I was sitting on that balcony with Ben, enjoying a glass of iced tea. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a generic, anonymous-looking address. The subject line was simply, "I'm sorry." It was from Sophia. The tone was completely different from the venomous rage of her last phone call. It was subdued, humbled. She wrote that the past few months had been the hardest of her life. She admitted that she and my mother had taken me for granted, that they had been living in a fantasy world funded by my hard work. She said she was in therapy, both alone and with her husband, and that she was finally learning to take responsibility for her own life. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just wanted to tell me that she finally understood. She ended the email by saying that Noah and Chloe missed me and asked about me often. I read the email several times. I didn't reply immediately. The wounds were still too deep for a simple reunion. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than anger or resentment. It was a tiny, fragile spark of hope. Perhaps, someday, a new, healthier relationship could be built from the ashes of the old one. But that was a thought for the future. For now, I was content. I had audited my life, identified the source of the rot, and surgically removed it. I had reclaimed my finances, my time, and my peace of mind. The New Year's ultimatum that was meant to be my breaking point had become my liberation. I had closed the books on a painful chapter of my life and had started a new one, written on my own terms. My name is Marilyn, and for the first time, I am the sole, undisputed author of my own story.